Hello, my name is Rick Ray. I'm a certified public accountant and owner of Global Tax Service, LLC. We're a public accounting firm specializing in preparing individual tax returns for persons living overseas. While we have individuals working for international conglomerates, people working for non-profit organizations and entrepreneurs, our main focus is on international educators working on American, international, or local schools or in overseas campuses of U.S. colleges and universities. This briefing is to give you some information if this is your first year overseas as to what to expect in terms of tax filing requirements. I'm going to cover who has to file, when you have to file, where you file, what forms you file, how you exclude your foreign earned income from tax, and a few other pointers. First of all, who has to file? If you look on the last page of your passport, you will see that every U.S. taxpayer overseas is required to file a tax return annually and report worldwide income. There are rumors to the contrary, which you should disregard. Every school that we visit, someone says, well, you only have to file a tax return if you have no U.S. source income, or they say, well, you only have to file a tax return if you make more than the foreign earned income exclusion. That's not true. You have to file a tax return if the sum of your worldwide income is greater than the sum of your personal exemption and standard deduction, which is approximately $10,000. Because you're overseas, you get an automatic extension to file. Instead of your return being due on April 15th, it's due on June 15th. There's no paperwork required to gain this extension. If you need more time to file, you can file IRS Form 4868 to extend the due date to October 15th. And in some cases, you can do a letter extension, further extending the due date to December 15th. We encourage clients to complete as much as possible of their tax returns by April 15th, because while your tax return isn't due until June 15th, any money is always due on April 15th. Because you're overseas, the IRS gives you a small break. If you owe money and you don't pay it by April 15th, they charge interest only from April 16th to June 15th. After June 15th, you pay both interest and penalty. If you get all of your tax return information together and can't quite complete the return, at least your tax professional can estimate what you owe so that you can make a timely payment on April 15th. How do you pay? The most convenient way is to pay from your U.S. bank account by going to the IRS website, www.irs.gov/payments, and you can then pay directly from your bank account at no cost. Finally, where do you file your tax return when it is complete? Hopefully your return will be filed electronically, which means there's no issue. But if you're mailing in your tax return and you exclude your foreign earned income from U.S. tax, you file your return with the Internal Revenue Service Center in Austin, Texas. If you either are not excluding your foreign earned income, claiming a foreign tax credit, or have no foreign earned income, your tax return is filed based on the table by the state address on the tax return shown in the directions for IRS Form 1040, 1040A, or 1040EZ. If you have an overseas address that you're using on your return, even if you don't have excluded foreign income, again, you file the return with the Austin Service Center. So how do I exclude my income from tax? One of the advantages that you may have overseas is that you won't be paying U.S. tax, and you may not be paying local tax. However, you have to qualify to exclude your income, and there are two potential ways that you can exclude your income from U.S. tax. The best, particularly for most educators, is to use the bona fide resident test. The bona fide resident test requires that you live outside the United States for an entire calendar year. That means in your first year overseas, where you normally arrive in August or late July, you will have a part year return by the end of that year, but you can't file because you don't yet qualify as a bona fide resident. You can't actually file your return until after December 31st of the year following the year you arrive overseas. Once you qualify as a bona fide resident with that entire calendar year overseas, the part year when you were first overseas then is covered by that bona fide resident exclusion. How do you qualify as a bona fide resident? Aside from living and working overseas for a period of 12 months, there are no other requirements, unlike the physical presence test. You have unlimited days in the United States. That means, particularly with an educator's schedule, that you can go home both for the end of the year holidays and for a lengthy summer vacation without jeopardizing your ability to exclude your income from U.S. tax. There are some people, however, who cannot file using the bona fide resident test. If you are a U.S. immigrant, resident immigrant alien, or a green card holder from a country that doesn't have a tax treaty with the United States, you are not allowed to use the bona fide resident test to exclude your foreign earned income from U.S. tax. If you're not remaining overseas for an entire calendar year, neither do you qualify. And finally, if you go to work in a country that has income tax and that has a tax treaty with the United States, and you're exempted from paying local income tax based on the treaty, you're not eligible to file as a bona fide resident. I'm not going to cover the details of how you file if you live in a country with an income tax and you're excluded from tax based on a treaty, as that's covered in a separate video. What I will say is, if you're in that circumstance, you don't qualify to use the bona fide resident test. You still may be able to exclude your income from U.S. tax. The second test is called a physical presence test. The physical presence test means that you live and work overseas for at least 365 or 366 days, or an entire year, not necessarily a calendar year. If you meet that requirement, you can potentially exclude your foreign earned income from U.S. tax, at least a portion of it. However, it's difficult to meet this standard if you're an educator and you want to spend time in the United States. People who file their tax return using the physical presence test are limited to only 35 days in the United States during that 12-month period. Assume, for example, that you arrived overseas on August 20th of 2015. You complete 12 months overseas on August 19th of 2016. During that period, you can only be in the United States for 35 days. And that 35 days counts travel days, not just full days in the United States. You have to count the day that you arrive in the United States, you have to count the day you depart from the United States, and you normally have to count the day you arrive in your overseas location, because you stop counting only when you have arrived in or passed over a foreign country. That means as much as 3 days each vacation period are actually spent in travel. So if you were planning on spending 14 days in the United States over Christmas and New Year's, when you add the travel time in, you probably have been charged for 17 days inside the United States, leaving you a very limited number of days for summer vacation in the United States. The penalty for not complying with these rules generally means that you're going to pay between $9,000 and $11,000 in U.S. tax that you could otherwise avoid over the 2 tax years that you're living overseas. You can have a great vacation in any place you choose in the world if it's going to save you between $10,000 and $15,000. Today I've covered who has to file, when you have to file, where you file. I've also talked about excluding your income from U.S. tax. You probably want to know what forms you have to file if you're preparing your own tax return. You can't use a Form 1040A or a 1040EZ if you have attached forms. That means you must file a Form 1040 and a Form 2555 in your first year overseas. In addition, because you're an educator, there are some allowances that are reported as income to you that are not taxable on your U.S. return, but they are reportable. That means for all of your years overseas, you will continue using Form 2555 and not the shorter Form 2555EZ. I hope this information has been of benefit. This information is general and may not apply in every specific case. If you have questions, concerns, and would like to contact us, please drop an email to info@globaltaxonline.net. That's info@ and then all one word, globaltaxonline.net. Provide us your name and the country in which you're working, and one of our specialists will get back to you to answer your questions. Thank you for your time.